to the comic shop. I'll let you read about Cyclops. I'll have you spending all you got. Cyberfrog is looking hot. Uncle E.
Hey everybody, Legit here, ready to tell you about the very first comic book I ever read. Now, I talked a little bit in the last video about the similarities between comic books and professional wrestling, but I want to explain more why I decided to do this. I really felt compelled to make a series of videos on comic books I grew up reading, because after watching reviews of modern comic books here on YouTube for the last few months, it's really become abundantly clear to me that kids today do not have a lot of quality comic books to choose from. And by quality comic books, what I mean are well-written, well-drawn comics that are chock full of moral fiber and patriotism, because comic books are there to teach children moral lessons. And that doesn't mean that there can't be other kinds of comic books out there, don't get me wrong. But the purpose of a comic book is to teach a child good from evil, just like professional wrestling teaches children good from evil, or at least it did for its first 100 years. And it's fair to say that comic books did for its first 75 years, let's say. But it seems like as comic books have become politicized, you might say, and it's perfectly acceptable for there to be political comic books. But I think that there should also be comic books for kids to read that parents can know are going to teach their kids positive lessons and help them grow up to be good adults, good adults, because we all have to live on this planet. And so we want strong children who grow up to be strong adults, who protect the weak and defend the defenseless. And that is what comic books did when I was a kid. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down into the comic book crypt. I'm going to dive into the back issue bin, and I'm going to pull out comic books that I actually read when I was a kid in elementary school and in middle school. And I'm going to share those with you. I'm going to read them for the first time in 20 years. And see what they really are all about, share them with you so maybe you can find some good comic books with great stories and great art that you can enjoy yourself, or that you can share with a young person in your life to help them learn what it means to be a patriot, what it means to respect freedom and to fight for freedom and to encourage those qualities in children all the time. And that's what comics did. And actually, the first comic I ever got was this gem right here. It was the official handbook of the Marvel Universe, the Book of the Dead, Deluxe Edition. And if it wasn't for professional wrestling, I would have never found this comic. If it wasn't for Portland wrestling, I would have never found this comic book. It was at Sandy Barr's world famous flea market that I first discovered what comic books really were. See, Sandy Barr was a wrestler when he was younger, but when I was a kid, Sandy Barr was the longtime referee in Portland wrestling. And he ran his world famous flea market, and that flea market was massive. I mean, maybe as an adult it was the same size as every other flea market, but when I was a kid, that felt huge. And we only went there a couple times. And my father said, "Hey, there's comic books here. You should pick out a comic book." I was like, "Oh, comic books, huh?" And when I was a kid, my grandmother had saved my dad and my uncle's Captain Action. Now, if you're not familiar with Captain Action, imagine a 12-inch plastic G.I. Joe figure. Remember the old G.I. Joes? It was just like that, except what made Captain Action so cool was that he came with a variety, well, you could buy a variety of costumes for him. You could buy Captain America's costume, Superman's costume, Batman's costume. There was also an Action Boy, I think, which was a smaller version, and you could dress him up as Robin or Aqualad, and then you could make Captain Action Aquaman. You put the costume on him, much like with a Barbie doll, where you put the costume on them. But what was cool about Captain Action was then you would slip this hard plastic mask down over Captain Action's head, and it was like Captain America all of a sudden you put Captain America's head on there, now he's Captain America. You put Superman's head on there, he's Superman. You put the Phantom's head on, he becomes the Phantom. So you could play with all these different characters, but you only needed one action figure. And I grew up on that, so I knew who Captain America was. And of course, if you grew up in the 80s and 90s, you automatically knew who the major characters were because of film and television rather than necessarily from comic books. You know, every kid today knows Spider-Man, they know Captain America, they know Iron Man, and they may have never been in a comic book shop in their lives, but they know them now, especially through video games, even more so. And so anyways, as a kid, I grew up knowing some of those characters, you know, and also through like the old Batman TV show with Adam West. And then, a little bit later on, when I was in middle school, they came out with the Batman the Animated series that was, you know, still stands as one of the greatest cartoons ever made. But it was at Sandy Bar's world famous flea market that I found this comic. You know, my name starts with an M. And so, of course, I went to the M's in the back issue bin, and I came across this evil, despicable Nazi. And, you know, when I was a kid, I grew up in a generation where my grandparents, everybody's grandparents, had fought in World War II against the Imperial Japanese and the Nazis of Germany. And so to pull this out and see what at that moment was still considered, you know, the most evil villains in the history of the world, the Nazis, and here is a Nazi, Sieg Heiling, right on the front of a comic book. And he's got this crazy red skull, and I was just like, oh my gosh, I have to know who this guy is. I have to know, because he looks like the only person I've ever seen who might be more evil than Adolf Hitler. And then you add in, you know, this interesting looking character, and then this guy who's got a really cool outfit, I think. You have this attractive girl here who I would find out is a woman named Gwen Stacy. You have this chick with the very interesting antennas. I didn't know. And I was just like, okay, this is the comic book I'm gonna get. And you know, you see that it's beautiful, beautiful splash page cover right there, wraparound cover. Love it. So anyways, I got this comic. I got it home, and I open it up, and this is what it is. It's literally just a description of everyone in the Marvel Universe who had died up to that time. And I was just transfixed by these costumes because it was very similar to, you know, some wrestlers you might see in the WWE. You know, I was absolutely enamored by masks as a kid. I still am fascinated by masks. And so the masked wrestlers were always my favorite. Top Gun, Dave Sierra. The Assassin, also played by Dave Sierra in Portland Wrestling. The Grappler, Len Denton, another masked man who just fascinated me. And so this was a great place. And by the time you get to this page, you're pretty much a comic book fan, because how can you not become a comic book fan after seeing The Phantom Rider 1? Not The Phantom Rider 2, The Phantom Rider 1. And as I poured through this comic book, and I found Pip the Troll, and I found Porcupine, found the Purple Man, and eventually you just keep going, and it doesn't stop. It just doesn't stop. And you get to the Red Skull, and I was able to read all about Johann Schmidt, a former beggar, thief, menial laborer, and bellboy, later terrorist leader of the Third Reich, would-be world conqueror. His identity is secret. His legal status is he's a citizen of Germany, sought by legal authorities throughout the world for war crimes and other major offenses. His other aliases that he went by, the Agent of 1,000 Faces. And it tells you his whole life story up until the day he died. And what really made it amazing was like, oh my gosh, Captain America, this is the arch nemesis of Captain America? He is the baddest guy on Earth. He is the baddest guy. And he tells you his height, his weight, his eyes, they were blue, but his mask made them appear to be red. You find out about Ringer, who looked like RoboCop, but green and gold. And it's like, whoa, who's this guy? And you just keep going all the way through. You discover Salem 7 and see these very creative characters here. Satana, her name has Satan in it, and when you're in elementary school, that is pretty big. That is like, whoa, she is scary. I thought Vacuum looked really cool too. And you get to the Savage Land races, and all of a sudden, it's just, you know, I'm a fan of comic books. Look at the Sun People. These guys really blew my mind, but the Zebra People even more. These guys, they're amazing, amazing characters and filled with so much creativity. And it was like maybe the first time in my whole life I realized that yeah, you can make up your own professional wrestler that you want to grow up to be. But man, you can also make up your own superhero to grow up to be. And I was absolutely fascinated by the list of Scourge's victims when I was a kid. See, Scourge is this guy right here. And he was wearing that Muscle Beach shirt, which if you grew up on comic books, you know Hulk Hogan rocked it at Muscle Beach all the time. And he had a crazy mask that he took off so you couldn't see his real face. He's like Zartan from G.I. Joe. Pretty awesome. And like, he killed Steeplejack too. He killed Ringer, the fake RoboCop looking guy. Shell Shock. He killed a guy named Hate Monger 3. He killed this Firebrand guy. I couldn't kill any of these guys other than maybe Turner D-Century and probably this Mirage guy with the satellite head. I think he's tuning into something there. But the mysterious vigilante known as Scourge recently committed a long series of killings of costume criminals, climaxing in the mass murder of 18 such criminals at the so-called Bar with No Name in Medina County, Ohio, one of a series of similar criminal meeting places. In each case, Scourge wore a disguise, slew the victim with an explosive bullet from his gun, and shouted, "Justice is served," upon his victim's death. They never figured out who Scourge was. You know, maybe they have by now, I don't know. It's very possible. But I always was fascinated by it. And then, you know, of course, then you get to the undersea creatures, the serpent crown, so to speak. And this row here really got me when I was a kid. I was just blown away by this right here. Not so much Destiny. You know, Conan, the Naga. Yeah, I'm skipping that guy too. See how I did that? And then, you know, you see Scarlet Witch and The Thing. Now, I knew who The Thing was, Fantastic Four. I did know who they were. Don't ask me how I knew who they were, but I did. And and my uncle, he also bought, for my little cousin Jake, my uncle also purchased all those old DC action figures, the little ones, like the size of, you know, G.I. Joes from the 80s. And so I was familiar with superheroes from that also. And they had a Super Friends, the show was on, you know, in reruns when I was a kid. So, you know, there was a way to see superheroes back then, and you didn't actually have to be at a comic book shop. But this, you know, this comic book here, this guy especially, this is the Spirit of 76. He was also Captain America 2. And this comic book really just changed my life in so many different ways. And the official handbook of the Marvel Universe, Book of the Dead Deluxe Edition. Okay, let's not go to the Book of the Dead part. Let's just say the official handbook of the Marvel Universe. It was actually the brainchild of Jim Shooter, then Marvel Editor-in-Chief. The original series was 15 issues. It ran from 1982 to 1984. And then in 1985, they started releasing the Deluxe Edition, which was 20 issues, and you just got so much more. They included technical drawings of equipment that were incorporated into the characters' entries, and it's absolutely the best comic book I could have ever started with. I highly recommend it if you have a kid that you want to get into comic books, and that kid knows how to read. That's important. If he likes to read, this is a great place to start because you're going to find out so much about it, and it really influenced me creatively. And it set me on the path to getting my next comic book, which was a more conventional comic book than this sort of handbook to describe all these characters. But man, it sure did spark my creativity in the same ways that professional wrestling did, but on a much grander scale, because I think I realized for the first time that, you know, a man made all these characters up. I mean, many men, you know, no offense to women, many humans made these characters. And that's just amazing to me, the idea that, oh, you can come up with more than one character. And it set me on my path in life to be a screenwriter. And I love this comic book, and I would recommend it to anyone out there who wants to find out more about the Marvel Universe or who wants to turn on a kid who likes to read. 2 comic books. This is a great place to start. In our next video, we're going to talk about the first comic book I ever bought at the newsstand. So I'll see you guys in a little bit. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter, Left Hand Legit, and also in the comments below, tell me, what was your first comic book you ever read? Who did it come from? Did it come from a dad, an uncle, a brother? Did you get it at the newsstand when your dad was just like, hey, we're going on a camping trip and grab a couple comic books to read while we drive the hour to the camping spot? How'd you find out about comics? Where'd you get into it?